Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
We are going to talk about measurements and subjectivity when it comes to speakers. Well, let's do some introductions first. If you are at all into this hobby, you probably know who's sitting to my left. A personal rock star of mine. 1983, this guy starts making speakers from people you probably know, four people you probably know: KEF, Infinity, Pioneer, TAD, ELAC, and most recently MoFi. Everything from $80,000 speakers all the way down to $69 speakers. And this is Andrew Jones. And I'm Randy. I make videos on YouTube, so that's as qualified as.
How long?
Well, only 5 years. Now, however, though, I was into hi-fi since I was 10. So I got my first system in 1985, 86. So, and I've been obsessed with it ever since. And I tell people ask me why am I interested in speakers or hi-fi, and I say there's two things. When I was a kid, I saw a motorcycle, and I didn't know why I liked it. I just know that I liked it. And I had the same feeling about speakers. I didn't know why I liked speakers. I just knew that I liked them. So today we're going to talk about chocolate cake and cheeseburgers. Okay? So, who here likes cheeseburgers? Okay? Oh my goodness. Jason, do you like cheeseburgers? What about chocolate cake?
Yes.
Okay. I would venture a guess that if we went around and we asked everybody what their favorite cheeseburger was or what their favorite cake was, I'm going to get a variety of answers. And no one's going to, well, there may be some people that have the same answer. And speakers have more in common with chocolate cake and cheeseburgers than anything else. So, they all have flour, they all have cheese. Well, if chocolate cake probably doesn't have cheese, but it could have cheese, and that might be one of your favorite chocolate cakes because it has cheese. But it just means you're different than other people. So, we have the sum of all parts: an enclosure, a tweeter, a woofer, a mid-range driver, a crossover. We have speaker bracing, we have port length, we have all these different things. And every one of those ingredients can change the way a speaker sounds. And I don't think there's anything more divisive in the hobby outside of maybe cables than speakers and how they should measure. So there's probably no one better suited to discuss speaker measurements and subjectivity than Andrew Jones. So why don't you talk about how you use measurements when you design a speaker?
Well, first I would say that the connection with cheeseburgers and chocolate, he's a cheesy bugger.
Yeah, cheesy bugger.
So I got into speakers very early, pre-teens, and I got an identical twin brother, and we both got interested in hi-fi, and he was more in the electronic side. I, for some reason, got into speakers themselves. And I remember trying to build speakers and realizing I didn't know what I was doing, obviously, at that stage. And I never finished building one, which questions why am I now in production of speakers rather than just research. Research is, if I knew what I was doing, it wouldn't be research, it would be product development. But I questioned, even at that stage, how would I know if the speaker I'm trying to build is right? You know, my listening experience at that age is very limited. So how do you know when it's right? Don't you need to measure it? So I started trying to work out how could I, as a teenager, start measuring. And I had a Tandberg moving coil microphone from my Tandberg tape recorder. Well, I could use that. But then, well, how do I know the measurement microphone is correct? Because it's not really a measurement microphone. So that started off a lifelong interest in measurement itself in all sorts of forms, but obviously particularly towards speakers. And I've never given that up. And when I joined KEF, my first job was in research, and since KEF had pioneered all the impulse testing, my interest and my role there was improving the accuracy of how we were testing speakers. So it's always been there, and to this day, I look and see how can I make better measurements, and look at identifying all the measurements other people make and seeing, this sounds big headed, how wrong they are. You can always spot these limitations. I was in one panel and they said, how is the availability with modern computers and programs to run on computers, how has it improved the ability to measure speakers? And I said, at KEF, we were doing that back in the late 70s. There's nothing you can do now to measure a speaker that we weren't able to do with the equipment we had at KEF at that time. So for me, all it's done is make it cheaper for people to get the wrong answer. So that's where it all started for me.
Okay, so you made how many speakers have you made? I'm not talking about how many have even been sold. Like in your lifetime, how many speakers have you made? Different ones.
I've not actually added it up, but it's hundreds.
Hundreds.
Yeah.
All right, hundreds. All right, so take me through the process of you building a speaker. And what percentage of that process includes measurements, and what point in the process do you measure and then go back and remeasure? And then at what point do you put the Andrew Jones art on that speaker?
I mean, the starting point of any speaker, if it's for commercial, to sell it rather than for myself, would have to be price point. Price dictates every choice you make, and particularly with the experience of doing very affordable speakers, like we said, $69 a pair. That's not what I pay to make it, it's what it sells for at full margin. It was a project for Circuit City at the time. They came in, it was early days in Pioneer, and when you're trying to decide what are you going to design, you also need to know, well, what's going to sell. Again, there's no point in designing something that's not going to sell. That's the hobby. So we'd have this big meeting, and they come in, have the meeting with all Pioneer people, and I said, so what do you think of the speakers that Pioneer is already making? And the answer was, well, it's a Japanese speaker and it's a bad speaker. And the two don't have to go hand in hand, but they were bad speakers. They would just throw things in a box for one of these old big box stereo systems. So I said, well, how about we design something that you want? Give me some idea of what category a speaker can sell for you. Instead of us coming up with a range of speakers and you cherry picking that, because not all speakers cost, the ratio of selling price to manufacturing cost is not 1-to-1 as you go up the range. Dealers know this, and they have an idea for value, so they cherry pick from the range, and then all the profits go to pot because you cost it out based on knowing what you thought was going to sell. So I got to work with them directly to specify what we were doing, and then you can start to plan. I've got price points to work for, I've got some broad product specification. Now where do I start? And so you have to intimately know the costs associated with every component. And in particular, when I was doing the Pioneer BS22, that was, the $69 speaker was, okay, this is a really cheap speaker, but I still want to try and do a good job. The Pioneer one the BS22 for Best Buy was, I think I can do something really decent with this. And by going through it and looking at the cost of every individual component, what would it cost me to change a cone profile? It costs nothing. Tooling costs, but production cost is zero to change it. So anything I can optimize without paying for, I do. Then every other part of it, how much is this component worth, or cost of performance, versus I could put that money into a bigger magnet on the driver, better cabinet. How much is a piece of wire going to cost me? Is it worth putting special wire in? And the answer is no, never, because I can always spend that money more wisely inside the speaker if I'm designing every single part. If I'm having to purchase drive units, then I have no control over the cost of that. But if I'm designing the drivers, then I do. And I've always been in companies where we've manufactured, from the past, where we've manufactured our own drivers in-house. So I get to know what a voice coil costs and how much it costs to glue it, all those little details. So that's where you start. And then you start to experiment, and that experimentation is initiated with measuring. You don't just throw something together, oh, I wonder what this sounds like, and listen to just a bare drive unit. That doesn't work. I was developing a drive unit, a small concentric driver with a new way of the cone bending and stuff, moving like this. And again with Pioneer. And Pioneer were doing the actual prototyping of it. So I went over and they said, we've got it ready for you to listen to. What do you mean you got it ready to listen to? I haven't designed a system around it. It's a mid-range with a tweeter in a concentric ray, but there's no crossover or anything. Oh no, we just kind of put one together. Just for that mid-range tweeter? Yes. Okay. So I listened to it, and after a few tracks, can we just stop this? This isn't the way I work. I haven't got the measurements of that prototype yet. I haven't designed a partial crossover. There's no bass driver. Oh, we can add a bass driver to it. What crossover frequency do you want? I don't know. I haven't measured anything. I do not start any process without doing all the measurements. And so in the end, I just stop. Just wait until they send me the driver, and I will start to do the work with that. So, because KEF, the emphasis was first of all measure, develop better measurement techniques, then that always is the starting point. But then that leads into what is a good measurement? What is the goal of what that measured performance should be? And how sure are you that you're making an accurate measurement so you can make that judgment between what it measures like and what it's going to sound like? And that's that whole kind of worms which we're talking about here.
So why don't you take people that don't understand or don't have the experience through how a speaker is measured, specifically in regards to anechoic or Klippel or anything like that, and then the challenges even when you do measure that speaker as far as the data that you get back.
Well, of course, one of the goals that people want to have is push a button, get an answer, right? Klippel allows you to do that in a more complete way than any readily available test equipment.
Tell the folks what a Klippel is, just in case they don't know.
So, Klippel I first met him when he was at Harman. He was in research, developing measurement techniques when I was there at Infinity. So that's early 90s, or mid 90s. And then he went on to form his company. And the Klippel system is a way of measuring initially frequency responsive loudspeaker at all angles, because being at Harman, he was used to doing the spinorama, which is Floyd Toole leading research in relationship between measurement and listener preference for loudspeakers. And I like to emphasize preference there, because in hi-fi we're always talking about accuracy, closest approach to the original sound. Great concept, totally flawed concept. Not one of us in almost any recording we listen to have a real clue as to what was done to produce the sound on that recording. And so when we look at all of Floyd Toole's work, I'm not denigrating you. Cameras, where's the cameras? Floyd was the person responsible for bringing me over here to Harman, so great guy. But what's got to be understood is the work of relating measurements to listening was done on a preference basis. They play recordings, play them over different speakers, make all the measurements of the speakers, and then try and work out what people prefer to hear.
What the majority of people prefer.
Yes, and the big
all
bands.
of them. Right?
Yeah, some people prefer this band, some people prefer that, and so you could categorize them into that. But it was still based on commercial recordings. It's not like they had a band in the next room, or let's say a string quartet, and they capture the sound of it and then play it back over these different speakers, and you can go between that room and this room and say, oh, this one sounds most like that. They didn't do that. It's commercial recordings and it's based on preferences. So they got some clear answers with that. It's just, the clarity is, this is what people prefer. This is the curve they prefer. So then my question goes back to, well, what kind of measurements do you make that properly represented what that speaker is doing? And that's where I take issue often with measurements that people are doing. The Clipper Analyzer automates all of that. It measures. See, when we say what should a speaker measure, we're talking about far field response. And what that means is you're far enough away from the speaker to avoid, well, this sounds like a roundabout argument, to avoid the problems you have in near field. Well, how do you define near field? Near field is when you're too close, far field is when you're far enough away. And it depends on the size of the speaker, but typically, let's say 3 meters, we would class as far field, not 1 meter. 1 meter is the wrong distance to measure a speaker. And although we say the standards for sensitivity, let's say, it's 2.83 volts in, gives a sound pressure level of, let's say, 90 dB at 1 meter. Doesn't mean we have to measure at 1 meter to establish that. We should measure at 3 meter and then calculate back what it would be at 1 meter as a consistent standard to judge. And if we're not using a consistent standard to represent what that measurement is saying about the speaker, then we're nowhere. And that's why we have standards committees. When I was at KEF, Laurie was on the IEC standards committee for defining IEC 268-5, which is how do you measure speakers? What distance? How do you measure impedance? How do you quote impedance? If we're saying 8 ohm, no speaker is 8 ohm. It does this. So how can it vary within that nominal rating? And you establish standards for that. But since he was on the committee, and I'm, as usual, you do the work, he gets the credit. Now I do the work and get the credit, so I'm good. But I said, what we need to do, we've got all these people trying to define standards for measurement. How well do they measure? So I built a speaker and I measured it. And then we did this round robin test. We passed it round all these international people to take it away measure it, and then send me the measurement results. They weren't even close. They varied by 2 to 3 dB in different frequency ranges. And that's people who are setting the standards for measuring. So where does that leave us, right? So it gets back to me trying to be more and more accurate about what causes inaccuracies when you measure. Because if I can't measure accurately, I cannot relate that to what I'm going to hear. And when I'm doing that design work and I'm start every part of it, measuring it and then designing crossover and then putting it all together and remeasuring it, anything I think I hear, once I get to the stage of listening, I will go back and go, oh, I hear this. I wonder, and then you look at the graph, which when you first measured the speaker, you're very optimistic. Oh, that's pretty damn good. And you go listen to it and you well, maybe not so good. Then you go back and go, well, I wonder if it's this bump. I kind of ignored it in the euphoria of getting something working. Now let's see if I think it might be that thing that caused this thing in the listening. Let me go and change that thing, re-listen again, hopefully not have any bias from expectation bias. I changed what I thought was causing the problem. I went back and listened and, oh, it sounds better. Did it really? What about if you come back next day and listen again? So you have to go around that loop and double check everything, triple check everything that you do. But it's not, I don't do double blind testing. And no, I admit it. I have done it in the past. It's extraordinarily complex. We throw out these platitudes. You should be doing double blind testing. Most people don't even know how to do double blind testing well enough and analyze the statistical analysis of doing a proper double blind testing is very difficult. You should be a statistic. I can't say it.
Statistician.
Thank you.
Yeah. That's what I'm here for.
In order to properly analyze that. And so we get into that debate of how do you assess through listening? And that's a whole different kind of words. So for me, I do trust my measurements to tell me what's going on in the first instance. To partially get around that problem of not doing true double blind. It takes a very long time to do a true double blind. We had an ABX test box at KEF, and we'd occasionally do ABX testing. I remember ABX testing someone who was claiming, this is the capacitor we should be using. This sounds so much better than that other capacitor. So I put them to the test. And one of the things that happens when you do subject yourself to double blind testing, and I say subject yourself because it is stressful beyond belief to do a double blind test, because if you believe you hear some differences and then a double blind test says no, you're just fooling yourself, that's not a nice thing to hear. I mean, as a scientist, you said, oh, good, I've learned something. But most people go, shit, I said all these things, I can't back it up. So one of the things I try to make sure of when I was doing double blind testing on other people rather than myself, I say the conditions here. People say, I hear the sound of the switch box. Oh, you shouldn't use those cables. You didn't use the right amplifier. I'm not comfortable. So what I say is, okay, you have A and B. Those are the two things I want you to determine between. And X is either going to be A or B. And so you can listen to A for as long and many times as you want. You can listen to B. And at some point, once you feel confident, you can hear the difference between the two things. You know what it is. You know what A is. It's that capacitor. You know B is that other capacitor. You think, well, that easy peasy. I know the difference. Now I'll press X, listen again, and have to say, is it A or B? Don't press X if you have any lingering doubt that you could identify whether X was A or B. By committing to X, you're telling me the test was sufficiently revealing and I am confident in my answers. If through statistics I find that you couldn't actually reliably tell the difference, you can't come back to me at that point and say, yeah, but if only you use this amplifier or that. No, you don't get to do that afterwards. And because it's stressful and tiring and you're repeating over and over again, what I also say is, if at any point you start to think, I need a break, take a break. Come back tomorrow. Come back next week. Anytime. We can pick up and continue this so that you're always confident at that point when you press X. It's so time consuming. You know, as a scientist, I should be saying, yeah, absolutely do that. But I know as someone who's trying to produce things on a timely basis for the next show, the launch of the next show or whatever, there's a limited time to do that. I have to sort of say, I'm going to trust my instincts. And why can I trust my instincts? Because I know how to measure. That sounds big-headed, but that's, I'm saying my specialty through life for the last 50 years has been, how do I measure? So I use that to help me get through. But then I do listen. I listen to my favourite recordings, and I persuade myself that I am reliable, right? And we can all say that. I know what I'm doing. Well, yeah.
I think you have a pretty decent track record of this.
Well, this is the thing. This is the thing. There's always a crisis of confidence. I was having a talk with my wife, and our friends are both, all three of us got psychotherapists type wives. So you get into these conversations, and every time, she sees me stressed out with this new speaker design, especially if I'm doing a Mark II version of something, or Mark III, or the reference version, it's got to be better. What defines better? Is it better to everybody? Or am I just going to find that the people who like Mark I don't like Mark II? But it doesn't matter because somebody else didn't like Mark I and likes Mark II. So do I still have a market? Do I still have a job? But it's always those thoughts going around. And she said to me, you seem to be always like this. I said, yes. So she said, put your Sheldon side on it and analyse it and say, if you've always had these thoughts, have all your speakers always sold? Yeah? Even ones that you had strong doubts about? Yeah? So doesn't that tell you that you're being unnecessarily worrisome about the results? So can't you trust from your track record that what I think I'm hearing is working well enough to guarantee that those speakers will sell? So that's my justification for not being sort of the true scientist. And I think there is an art to designing speakers that goes with the science. And this is where it comes in. So I've never designed a perfect speaker. No one has ever designed a perfect speaker. There's no such thing. Don't care about price point. This feeling as you go higher in price point, shouldn't all the performance and the sound converge to one common sound, which is the sound that is accurate? Well, actually, the more higher price point you go, it seems to diverge, because now we can do all sorts of different things, because we only have to please a few people, because I only need a few people to buy $1 million speaker, and then I can retire. I need a lot of people to buy $100 speaker to retire on.
You can't retire because then you'd be paying yourself to design speakers.
So, you look at the measurements first, and we like to say, well, measurements are objective, but the interpretation of measurements is subjective, in the sense that if it's not measuring perfectly, and not even to a goal of, I'd love it to be perfectly flat with this downward slope or whatever characteristic I decide it should have, beyond knowing what the target is that I'm aiming for, whatever that target is, I'm never going to match that perfectly. And so it's going to be inaccurate. That inaccuracy gives it a sound character. And the complexity of measuring speakers, which is what we said about the clip all doing everything all the way around and at a push of a button, is that, at least in terms of frequency response, if I measure an amplifier, it's a straight line. Pretty much every amplifier is as straight a line as you can get within a certain bandwidth. Speaker is never that. And it changes with every single angle. And then when you put it in a room, because the room returns that off-axis sound to you in an unknown manner. I touched upon this before we started, looking at pictures of people's listening rooms. And it's going, shame on you guys. You're putting my speaker in that environment. You don't deserve my speaker. But I have to recognize, again, commercially, yes, I got a nice room that I put together for my listening. But not everybody has that, so we'll ever have that.
I think that's one thing we should key in on it a little bit and explore is, even if there was continuity amongst measurements, and even if that measurement was done at the listening position, I can pretty much guarantee that measurement was not done at your listening position in your room, with your ears, with your preferences. So, tell me how the measurements are somewhat challenged when it comes to putting it in other people's rooms.
So, in the old days, before all the impulse testing type measurements, before putting tone bursts through in the 50s, Wharfedale were putting tone bursts in. When we think about how long we've been trying to measure speakers, how long we've been trying to evaluate them, I'll bring that up now. This, let's see, rather, no, too big. 40%, 50%. That'll do. This is a graph of frequency up the side, written upside down. I didn't put this graph together. And this is qualities. If you have an excess in certain frequency bands, what it does to the sound of instruments and voices, or you have not enough, what it does. And these are very useful guides to if you've got inaccuracies in your speaker or any equipment, inaccuracies in the flatness of the response, how it's going to influence the sound of the instruments you're listening to. I want you to pay attention. What's that date? 1938. We knew this, right? It's not new. We're doing tone burst testing in 1948 to try and eliminate, understand the time behavior of speakers, and in the 70s we were doing time delay spectrometry, which was an analog way of eliminating the room from the measurement. Because if we're going to say we're measuring the far field response, under what conditions? If we want to know what the speaker's doing, we need to know what the speaker is doing. That sounds stupidly obvious, but speakers only exist in an environment. Measuring an amplifier, we measure it without the environment being affecting what we're measuring. Speakers not like that. So if we say we want to know the speaker independent of the environment, we have to have an environment which returns nothing back to the microphone other than what the speaker directly sent to the microphone. That's what we call an anechoic chamber. And typically they're built a big room, it's a room within a room, so it's fully floating and isolated from the environment, electrostatically shielded, magnetically shielded, vibration shielded, and then the walls are lined with these absorbers, so anything that goes out to that wall never comes back. It's actually very fun. Well, I find it fun being in a chamber. I've had lots of opportunity to spend time in anechoic chambers, and you close the door, you can't hear anything. You can hear the blood running through your ears. You can hear your heartbeat if you're staying long enough. I take people in there and also turn off the lights. That's really fun. Actually, as an aside, I was in there once in Pomona, California, and it's double doors and everything. So I'm in there, come out, it's about lunchtime. Whereas everyone, the office is empty. There was a got off for lunch and forgotten I was here. Then I went into the front office. They're not there either. And then looked outside. They're all lining up outside. There'd been an earthquake. I was safe inside because I'm all isolated. I can't hear anything, except that in space no one can hear your scream. Same thing in an anechoic chamber, and it's shielded. Couldn't even use a cell phone. If something had collapsed on the door, I would not be here today. But so we have this idea of an anechoic chamber.
Died doing something you love.
So you can measure the speaker without the influence of the room. You can also measure it at every angle. So if we recognize, once we put it in a room, it is radiating full space. It's sounds going to the front, to the sides, to the back, and the room is returning that to you in varying degrees. Changes with frequency, changes with angle. But if you just measure in a room like we used to do in 1938, what you're measuring is that speaker in that room for that location of speaker in that room and that location of microphone in that room. And it gives you no ability to predict what it would do under different circumstances. And the IEC tried to establish this is what the IEC listening room should be. Establish a reverberation characteristic versus frequency and all these parameters to say, if you're going to listen and test speakers in a room, do it in this room. Don't, because it sounds awful in there. It's just not the right characteristics generally we find to enjoy listening. Technically it might tell us something, but it's not interesting to listen to music in that room. We had one at KEF. Everybody complained that our listening room was dead. And but it's IEC. Don't like it. So we have to develop techniques that can separate out what the speaker is doing independent of the environment in sufficient number of directions that we could then predict with a room of certain dimensions, certain absorption characteristics in different ways, what it would sound like, hopefully, or at least predict how it might measure at this point, the listening chair. And at KEF, we did this collaborative venture between ourselves, the Technical University of Copenhagen, DTU I think it's called, and Bang & Olufsen. And it was take one of Europe's biggest anechoic chambers, and set up speakers all the way around, 360 degrees, above the netting, below the netting, and have a listening chair there. Then we built a computer program that could calculate every angle from the speaker, where the virtual image of that is in the wall. So every reflection is basically, the room is a mirror. So you can think of it, instead of being a reflection, you've got an extra speaker out there, an extra speaker up here and over there. So we could simulate where those are, what their strength is. We could alter it, so its frequency response dependent on the absorption characteristics of a presumed wall, based on a presumed directivity characteristic of the speaker. So this was a 32-channel DSP engine back in the early 90s. They didn't exist. We built our own discrete 32-channel DSP. And I built all the speakers. They were all concentric drivers, put in fishing floats which are round so we wouldn't get reflections off from. So I built 32 of these to go around, all built with current drive amplification active. So I measured every speaker and we installed them in the chamber. And then with this computer program, you could sit somebody in there and listen to a pair of speakers that we'd characterized in an anechoic chamber. And it's awful. Stereo system sounds awful if you listen to it in an anechoic chamber. You need reflections. But then we could turn on the room, because we'd characterized, we want to investigate this room characteristic. Turn it on, and suddenly, oh my God, it sounds like I'm in the room. And then we go, I wonder which reflections are the worst ones. Maybe it's the floor, and we go, turn off the floor and listen. Turn off the ceiling and listen. Turn off the sidewalls, or move them out, or change the effective absorption characteristic. So we began to learn what a speaker should measure like at different angles in different types of rooms. So that was a multi-year project, and it was the Technical University that did all those listening tests and all the analysis. We were providing the equipment. And that's where Floyd Toole started all of his work from, because he saw what we were doing, and then he did the mini version of it at the NEC up in Canada. So that started to inform us about what should a speaker do, what kind of directional characteristics matter. And yeah, we're going to go way over. If you want to say, that's fine. So it's a great chance to start to learn what influences how it will sound in the room, and what do we need to do about that. And partly why I like concentric drivers. It's so much easier to know what it's doing at different angles.
And so it was interesting. I was in Florida, Jason, right? And there was a room where there's 2 microphones, and you put those microphones literally in your ear. And they ran a test, and the interesting thing was no 2 persons' tests were the same, and it has to do with ear shape. So fundamentally, we all hear things differently. And the way that my profile was done, I saw a rise between about, 5K to about 2K. So that means everything between 5K and 2K, because of my anatomy, because of the way my ears are built, there's a boost. And I can't stand flat measuring speakers, because I always feel like they're not dynamic. It's too forward in the mid-range. And for the first time, I realized that this makes sense. The reason why I don't like flat sounding speakers is because I don't hear the same way everybody else
I'm
hears.
never sending him a speaker review every day.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry I'm interrupting you. I just have a question.
Yeah.
If what you're saying is right and it makes total sense the way you say it, then how do you explain that you sitting in front of somebody playing music, whatever music is coming to you is coming, let's say, the response is flat,
Sure.
coming through the air, assuming, and your ears still have that bump,
Right.
but it doesn't sound unpleasant. But then a flat sounding speaker, remove the musician, put the flat recording of that in this same spot, play the flat sounding speakers to you, and now they'll sound bad. Why is that?
I don't know.
Because 1 foot away measurements are different than what you took in your ear. Everybody has that accentuation that you measured.
Yeah.
Now, to different degrees, if your ears are more cupped, bigger, you're going to have more of it. But everybody does, because certain frequencies in the wild, we need to hear
Right.
those
Yeah.
frequencies. You know, a bird of prey or something. Those sounds need to be accentuated. That's why we have this cup. It's just not a hole. But everybody in ear is going to have some level of what you have,
But not-
and that's natural to you.
We looked at mine. No, mine was
Pretty
accentuated.
significantly
but-
different. Yeah.
So you're right. The ear is supposed to not provide a flat response at the eardrum. It can't happen. It won't happen. It's not supposed to happen. And the shape that you measure at the eardrum is influenced by the pinna, by the depth of the ear canal, how much hair you've got,
torso
in
too,
it, right?
in your
and then the torso,
Females,
and
right.
everything changes that. So all this head-related transfer function, all the dummy head recordings. You know, if we want to capture a real musical event, sticking a pair of microphones in front of it or multi-microphones never captures the original event. The closest way we have of doing that is dummy head recording. And dummy head recording says, I'm going to place microphones where the ears are, a dummy head, ideally molded to the same ear shape as you have, and then going to play it on in-ear headphones, not outer ear headphones. So it eliminates the double dipping of the shape of your pinna. When you do that, it's remarkable. But it can only be done, it only works effectively if it's your ears on the dummy head. And it's your ears when you play back. It doesn't translate amongst people. But the ear, I'll say, at the eardrum does not have a flat response. Shouldn't have a flat response. But like you said, everything we do here, our brain has accepted and learned that that's what things sound like. So if we were going to say we want the closest approach to the original sound, we'd say we're used to, our ear knows what original sounds are. It's learnt them through our lifetime. So if I do dummy head recording, I don't compensate for that boost that the ear's supposed to have. But you could say that if your curve is too far from the norm of what most people are, that perhaps certain sounds are more annoying to you. You accept that that's what that sounds like to you. That saxophone sounds like that to you, and you go, oh, I hear all the breath noises too loud. I don't like the sound of the saxophone. Or sibilance in a recording. I hate sibilant female vocalists. That's okay, but it doesn't. And for pleasure in listening, you could then say, yeah, I prefer not to hear that. I hear it in real life all the time and it bugs me. So I could choose that what I want to hear in a replay system compensates for that. And it gets back to this cheeseburger
That's
thing,
right. Yeah.
that everybody has different preferences. And that leaves me with a dilemma in designing the speakers, that if it isn't accurate, and if you prefer something less technically accurate,
Right.
and I'll do a special version just so next.
Now listen, man.
But this is the point. So if I'm designing, do I try and guess what everyone's preferences are? You know, we said, going back to Floyd Toole, they put listeners into preference bands. Some people prefer more high frequencies and some less, and so on. So they got different categories that they could slot listeners in for preferences. If it had only been one curve, maybe we should all design for that, because we'd have the widest acceptance to sell more speakers. But there wasn't a single preference curve. There were a variety of them. If I try and guess what people want from the choices I've made, or second guess what they want, it gets very difficult. You start chasing your own tail. You know, not so much from reviews, but when you read people's comments about You should never do that. You should never go on the internet. What are they saying about? What are they saying about my product? Just leave it alone. How many did I sell? That should be the only metric in that sense of whether I'm doing the right thing. So, you'll find comments. Oh, I didn't like Andrew's speaker. It's too bright for me. And someone else say, oh, no, I thought it was too dull. And then it's Goldilocks. Well, this one was just right for me. Well, if it's too bright or too dull or just right, do I change it? I can't. I just got to trust that, like I say, if I like it, I hope you like it. And, yeah.
It seems like there's three factors in speakers. What does it look like? What does it sound like? And how much does it cost? And it seems to me that people I've met in this field, what they look like is very important. What they cost is very important. The more expensive they are, the better they're going to sound. And the sound of them really isn't quite as important. But when you're designing a speaker, is the look, the price, or the sound the most important factor in your decision?
I mean, that is a very interesting question because it goes back to this idea of double-blind testing. You know, Floyd Tool, with all that work on preferences, says your preferences are so disrupted by what you see and what it costs. So you should not allow that. You should listen in a way, make a decision. If you're buying hi-fi for listening to music, you should ignore all those other things that influence your decision and just listen to the sound. Listen behind curtains. As soon as you see it, you're gonna be judging that as part of your experience. There were tests where, even with TVs with vision, they had 3 TVs. They were all identical TVs, set up identically, but each had a different pair of speakers with them. So you went up and watched a movie on them, and you were asked which one has got the best picture, and it went with which one had got the best speakers. So you can influence it the other way round, right? So, yes, from a scientific point of view, if you're supposed to be choosing speakers on what they sound like, you should remove those other variables. And this is the great thing about scientific experimental methods. You've got to eliminate variables. It should be a single value experiment. That's extraordinarily difficult to do. Even if you know what those other variables are, eliminating them can be difficult. But so many times you think you've eliminated them, but there are coupled variables that you haven't accounted for. But what it forgets is that we are influenced, we're emotional. The whole point about modern scientific method, by modern I mean since 1500 when Francis Bacon set out these parameters of how we do experimental method, remove the observer from the experiment. But the observer is the experiment here, right? So, this hair shirt idea of just give me a black box, don't make it pretty, just give me a black box, I'll buy that. So that all the money is in, all the costs went into the sound. You know how many ugly black boxes I'd sell? Right? I wouldn't be making a living much out of that. So, price is obviously a factor. We're trying to give best value for money. And that's something, other than an $80,000 speaker, which, by the way, there's no such thing as a cost no object product. If I do a $100,000, let's say in the old days when no one was doing $100,000 speakers, these days people have gone up to $1 million. We would have thought that was just crazy if you'd said that 10 years ago. And yet now there's competition in the $1 million category, right? So where's cost no object gone? You've always got competition. If you show there's a market for something, someone else is going to, oh, I'm going to do that as well. That's my retirement fund. So relax, I'm not doing $100 speaker. $1 million, sorry. But so if you've got a competitor, you still have to worry about value. It's got to sound better at $1 million than that other guy's. So cost always comes into that discussion, that decision about how you're engineering the speaker. And looks absolutely do. So yes, Floyd, from a scientific point of view, listen to it behind a curtain. But that's not going to happen. That's not how you're going to judge it. You're going to bring it into your home. And if vision does influence your preference of how you thought it sounds, and if price does, it's always going to do that.
Yeah.
You're always going to be happy, because that every time you walk into your room thinking, oh, I want to listen to my speakers, but you look at those speakers, you know, those look gorgeous. You're immediately going to be happy before you even turn it on.
Let's
Okay.
real quick. So the one thing you mentioned was emotion
Mm-hmm.
and science. Science and emotion.
Yeah.
How do you measure what song's going to give people, you know,
Goosebumps.
goosebumps?
Great question.
It is. And
So, no, I'm sorry, but we are trying to define an emotional experience with science, and maybe it gets us part of the way there, but the rest of the way is, what type of cheeseburger do you like? But it is.
yeah. You know,
Then about how our ears are made. Why do I like heavy metal? Why do I like the grunt? And I will tell you that the first gen debut speaker that you made was the most amazing speaker, because when James Hetfield hit the guitar, and I felt it. I felt the guitar in my chest. I had my wife come in and she said, how many speakers do you have going? I said, 2. She said, these are amazing, because then you have off-axis performance. You have all these different things. And so that speaker, I mean, I think the debut looks pretty good too, but that speaker, the way that it made me feel with the music that I enjoy, became the speaker that I wanted to keep. And by trying to define a algorithm equation about what the perfect speaker is, we're not asking the right question. There's a story about NASA making a pen that wrote upside down, small pen. The astronauts needed it because they were in zero gravity and needed to write upside down, right? So NASA spent millions of dollars, research, everything. Finally found this pen after, 100 different iterations that all failed. And so finally they sent them up to space with their pen. They were able to write. Everything was a success. And the Russians used a pencil. So, for me, at the end of the day, I put a speaker in my living room, I sit in my listening position, and I turn on Metallica. And if that speaker makes the hair go up on the back of my neck, then I know that's the right speaker for me.
it's true. How do you measure that? And this is where we need our wives to be on the panel. I've often thought, with methods of imaging the brain these days, you can, to some degree, image emotion. You look at blood flow in the brain, in the areas that define emotion, and that gives you some idea of how the synapses are firing to kind of create emotion. So, if I want to test whether my speaker is good or not, I should stick someone in the MRI and play with my speakers.
Probably good idea.
Except they just go crashing into the MRI. Yeah.
The volume's not right either.
Sorry? And the environment isn't right.
Right.
But it's kind of those things of, like I said, scientific how do you take the person, the experimenter or the subject out of the equation? Or how do you really understand how they're feeling about what you're doing? You need to measure emotion. And the thought of the MRI, but not a practical answer. But it's that thing. How do you do that? And we have a semi-scientific language for describing sound of music, sound of speakers. And there are established words you're supposed to use. We also dream up new words. And not everybody understands the meaning when we have, and I'm not attacking subjective reviews, this is not the point. How would you describe what that speaker is doing to you, what that sound is? And you try and use language, but that language does not translate very easily. Trying to guess what someone means by random words, spaciousness. What does that mean to everybody? Is it how tight the image is, or is it how big the image is? Is it height? What do we mean? And does everybody hear that in the same way? So a language to describe that is useful. A language to describe emotionally, instead of describing the sound that we're hearing that creates the emotion, which is why we're listening in the first place, then is there an emotional language that could be used to define whether you like it or not? But then, suppose we establish an emotional language. We've now got to correlate, because I can't measure emotion as I'm designing the technical aspects of the speaker. So now we'd have to find new ways of correlating measurements to emotional response, and we'll way off that. But shouldn't that be the objective long term?
Yeah. Well, I think that how the artist intended, I think, again, that's a red herring argument. Because at the end of the day, Step was recorded in the 1970s, the late 50s, the late 60s. I mean, you listen to Jimi Hendrix. I listened to the top 10 records, or one of the songs from the top 10 records from 1968. And it was the original recordings. And how that was recorded to be played back was not to be played back on $1 million system. It was to be played back on a modest system, especially popular music, right? So that mastering was done to play through a very bad system or transistor radio or whatever it was. And I was amazed at how bad this music sounded. Now, since it's been remastered, it sounds way better. But the point about it is like 1968, when that record got pressed, somebody would have said, this is how the artist intended, or this is how the mastering engineer intended it. So there's a continuum and a difference in how things are recorded past 50, 60 years. And there's new versions of it. So to think that an amplifier needs to be uncolored, a speaker should be uncolored, everything should be how the artist intended it, well, we don't know.
Well, it amuses me.
What about John?
Lo-Fi has to forgive me for this one. When something gets remastered to make it supposedly a better transcription of what was on the tape, and I listen to them thinking, why did you bother? The sound quality was so bad. But the music was fantastic. And like you said, sometimes a piece of music that you really know and love, and you've always been listening, you grew up listening on the TV or the radio, and then listen on a really good sound system, and go, oh, I can't listen to that now. My system's too good for this, right? You've lost the emotion by having an accurate system. It was better on the radio. So there is that aspect of it, yes. Something is the 24-196 version better than
So
standard one?
I think we're over, but I think we should wrap it up, and then maybe we can take a few questions about. At the end of the day, millions of dollars have been spent to get the best measuring speakers that you can possibly get, to assign scientific explanation to an emotional experience, and that looks shouldn't matter, and that we can't divorce looks from how a speaker sounds. So I think at the end of the day, buy a pair of speakers from a place that has a liberal return policy. Turn them see if you like them. And if you don't like them, send them back. And with that, probably a few questions, and then we probably need to wrap it up.